Good morning, gentlemen. I'm coming to you again from the Deanship of the Common Year, Manchester University, and we are doing our English second language course, the online version. I am your teacher, Dale Warren. The language skill we are doing today is speaking, and we will be covering Unit 5 of Level 3. Once again, we are using the Q Skills for Success, Listening and Speaking, Book 3, the book with the green cover. Now, for anybody who doesn't have the book, the textbook, or who doesn't have a pen and a piece of paper, I want you to pause the video right now, go and get your textbook, and go and get a pen and a piece of paper, because you are going to need them. All right, you should all have a pen and paper, and you should all have your textbook. The lesson contents today are the past perfect tense on page 104 and contracting the auxiliary verb had on page 106. Our homework is recognizing the tense, and that is on pages 106 to 107, and it will be exercise A. All right, I need you all to turn in your textbooks to page 104. And the page that you're looking at should look like that, the past perfect. Okay, the past perfect tense is also known in classical grammar as the pluperfect tense. In fact, it is called the pluperfect tense traditionally. But using our Q Skills books, we are going to follow their terminology and call it the past perfect tense. But if you have heard that other term before, don't get confused. It means exactly the same thing, the past perfect or the pluperfect. All right, let us start with a few basic definitions. The past is the things that have already happened, the things that are already finished. That is the past. The present is the things that are happening now. And the future is the things that are going to happen still. The future is the things that have not happened yet. So if we look at a timeline, the things that happen first are in the past. The things that happen second are in the present. And the things that happen third are the things that are in the future. All right, so past comes first, second the present, and lastly the things that will still happen in the future. Now, we make the past perfect tense as follows. We use the auxiliary verb had, and then we use the past participle of the main verb. The entire past perfect construction is made as follows. We have a subject, we have the auxiliary verb had, we have the past participle of the main verb, and we have the predicate. So it is a very simple 4-block construction. Block number 1, your subject. Block number 2, had. Block number 3, the past participle of the main verb. And block number 4, the predicate. So let's have a look at some examples. I had are the subject, had the auxiliary verb, eaten, the past participle of the main verb, and my predicate, I had eaten my breakfast before Ali arrived. Hamza, the subject, in example 2, had, block number 2, asked, which is the past participle of the main verb to ask, and the predicate had asked Kate to marry him a year before she agreed. The Saudis had fought in Yemen for years until they got tired. The Saudis is our subject, had is our second block, fought is the past participle of the verb to fight, and our predicate, in Yemen for years until they got tired. Our last example, Kate is the subject, had is the auxiliary verb, cooked is the past participle, and our predicate, spaghetti for supper. Now, on your piece of paper, I need you to make me 2 sentences following this pattern. So please get your pen and paper, and I want you to make me 2 sentences following this pattern. Remember, subject in the first block, had in the second block, past participle of the main verb in the third block, and predicate in the fourth block. So, please pause the video and give me 2 sentences following that pattern. And when you have finished making the 2 sentences on your piece of paper, you can unpause the video. Alright, you should have done your sentences and unpaused the video. Let us give 2 more examples. We, subject in the first block, had in the second block. Forgotten is the past participle of the verb forget. We had forgotten to buy groceries on Sunday. Okay, so that was our predicate. So if you have a sentence with a subject, had, the past participle of the main verb, and then a predicate, it should be fine. Sorry. The king had Okay, the king is our subject. Had is our auxiliary verb. Visited is the past participle of the verb to visit. And we would say the king had visited England before last year. If you have another sentence that starts with a subject, that then has a had, that then has a past participle, and a predicate that makes sense, then your sentence should be correct. Okay, so very simple. This is the construction: subject, had, past participle, and the predicate. Now, if we look at 3 actions in the past, we will usually rank them as follows. Action number 1, the first action. We will use the past perfect tense for that. For action number 2, the thing that happened next, we will use the past simple text. And for action 3, the thing that happened last in the past, we will use the present perfect tense. So the past perfect tense is very far in the past. The past simple tense is not so far in the past. And the present perfect tense is just a little way into the past. But if we just use 2 tenses in the past, then we will use the past perfect tense, the tense with had, for the first action, and the past simple tense is for the second action. Alright, so remember, for the first action you are using the past perfect tense, which is the tense with had in it. Very easy to remember. It is the tense with had that comes first. That is the past perfect. So, if we look at our earlier actions, he had been at work for hours when we called him. He had been at work for hours first, then later, the second action, we called him. Paul had driven for an hour, that is the first action, before he noticed his flat tire. That is the second action. Notice the first action, had and had. The second action does not have an had, it just is the past simple tense. Called is the past simple tense. Noticed is the past simple tense. They had already eaten dinner. That is the first action, and because it is the first action, it has the past perfect tense, which means it has to have that verb had. They had already eaten dinner by the time I got home. The second action, I got home, is just the past simple tense. Now, I've given you 2 more sentences here. I had worked 10 years in South Africa gives you the first action, past perfect tense. And here, before she got married, gives you the second action. On your papers, I want you to fill in the missing words here and here. Now, what you can do, any action that logically follows I had worked 10 years in South Africa can go here, but if it goes here, it must be in the past simple tense. So you can get any action that logically follows, but it must be in the past simple tense. The action that comes here is the first action, so it must be in the past perfect tense. So give me a missing clause here and give me a missing clause there. Alright, pause your videos and on your paper complete those 2 sentences. Okay, I need you to fill in a clause over there in the past simple and a clause over there in the past perfect. All right, you should have paused your paper and given us some answers. So, I had worked 10 years in South Africa. The first action before I got a promotion. The second action. Kate had worked for 10 years before she got married. This is the first action, and because it is the first action, it must be in the past perfect tense, which means it will have a had. Now, you can use any answer of your own as long as this answer, the verb, is in the past simple. So got is the past simple for the verb get. And you can use any answer of your own here as long as the verb is in the past perfect, which means it has a had and it has a past participle. Because this is she, you would use a lady's name over here. Kate would be she. You could not put Ali had worked for 10 years before she got married. It would have to be Ali had worked for 10 years before he got married. All right. Now, please note that the clause with the second action usually starts with terms such as when, before, until, or by the time. So when we had the second action, it started all these clauses with when, before, by the time. And those are the time phrases or clauses that we use, the terms about time with which we will introduce the second action in such a construction. Now, there is something else I wanted you to notice. In all of these sentences, the earlier action takes the past perfect tense, and we also put it first in the sentence. We put the later action second in the sentence. But we do not have to do it that way. We can switch the later action and put it earlier in the sentence. So you can say, by the time I got home, they had already eaten dinner. When I got my first promotion, I had worked 10 years in South Africa. Before she got married, Kate had studied in Paris. Let's just change these. So what we are saying, you can either say they had already eaten dinner by the time I got home. Kate had studied in Paris before she got married. Or you can say it the other way around. By the time I got home, they had already eaten dinner. Before she got married, Kate had studied in Paris. You can say I had worked 10 years in South Africa before I got my first promotion, or you can say when I got my first promotion, I had worked 10 years in South Africa. But even when you mention the second action first, the action which has the past perfect tense had eaten is the action that occurred earlier. So by the time he got home, that is the action that took place second. We had already eaten dinner first. By the time I got my first promotion, that action took place second. I had worked 10 years in South Africa. Before she got married, that is the second action, Kate had studied in Paris. That is the first action. We can change the order of the clauses in the sentence, but what tells us which action happened first is the tense. What tells us which action happened second is the tense. We know which action happened first by the use of the past perfect tense, not by the order of the actions in the sentence. So whichever clause has the verb with a had, that happened first. The other clause which doesn't have a had, the action occurred second. Even if we mention that action first, it actually occurred second. All right. I need you all to have a look at page 104, and it is exercise A, which goes on to page 105. All right. What they want you to do is read the two sentences. Then, whichever action happened first, put a 1 next to it and a 2 next to the other, and then combine the sentences with the conjunction they have given you. So the conjunction for number 1 is before, the conjunction for number 2 is until, and so forth, all the way through to number 8 on the next page. Okay, if we look at number 1, the scientist retired first, and then he would have begun research on a new area of interest. So we will put 1 against the scientist retired because that happened earlier, and then we will put 2 against the other action which happened later. And then we will combine the sentences. So what I need you to do is go through all of these sentences and put 1 against the action that happened first, 2 against the action that happened second, and then write the full sentence underneath using that conjunction to join those 2 sentences. All right. If you didn't understand that, let us have a look at example 2. I didn't hear about Brunonia Barry. I read the article. Logically, we read the article first, and when we have read the article, then secondly, we should be able to hear about Brunonia berry from the article. So if we had to look at that, the first action was I read the article. So I didn't hear about Brunonia berry, that is action number 2, until I read the article. So our answer would be, I didn't hear about Brunonia berry, action number 2, until I had read the article, action number 1. 2 and 1. Okay, please go through the other questions. Put your answers and then we will go through together. Pause the video and do the answers and then start the video again. Alright, you should have completed all the answers. Number 3, it started to rain before we had finished hiking. It started to rain before we had finished the hiking. Okay. The first action logically would be, it started to rain before we finished hiking. You could say before it started to rain, we had finished hiking also. Some of these questions have answers that could go either way. So we could also say here, we had finished hiking was what happened first before it started to rain. It can be done either way. But the action happening first should have the had in it. Number 4, Howison picked up the phone. It stopped ringing. By the time Howison picked up the phone, it had stopped ringing. We are saying that the ringing stopped first, and then Howison picked up the phone second. And because the ringing stopped first, we would use had before stopped. Because that is the first action, it goes into the past perfect tense with the had. Right, number 5. Until my sister had told me, I didn't realize my sweater was on backwards. Your sister told you first, and because that is the first action, had goes in front of told, making it the past perfect. And then I didn't realize is the past simple for the second action. Nawaf, number 6, had left his house when his mother called. Nawaf had already left, so that is the first action. And because it is the first action, it goes into the past perfect with had. And the second action is just the past simple, called, which is the past simple of the verb call. I had drunk, number 7, the cup of coffee before I realized it was mine. I drank the coffee first, so we will put the verb into the past perfect, which uses had. I had drunk the cup of coffee. And then the verb in the second action, realized, is just in the past simple. I had drunk the cup of coffee before I realized it wasn't mine. Number 8, by the time we arrived at the airport, our plane had departed. Our plane left first, so we put that action into the past perfect with had, and then we arrived at the airport. That is the second action, and it is just the past simple arrived, which is the past tense of the verb to arrive. So as you can see, sometimes we mention the earlier action second, sometimes we mention the earlier action first, but every time the earlier action will have that word had, and that tells you it is the earlier action. The other action came later. Even if we mention the later action first, it still did not happen earliest. The action which has the had in it is the action that happened earliest. All right. Moving on, that auxiliary verb had is often contracted into shorter forms, and this is covered on page 106 in this section. If we look at the long forms and the short forms, I had goes to I'd, you had goes to you'd, he had, she had, we had, they had go to he'd, she'd, we'd, they'd. In the long form, the negative form, it is always had not, and it always becomes hadn't. So I had not, you had not, she had not, it had not, all become I hadn't, you hadn't, we hadn't, they hadn't, she hadn't. They all abbreviate to that form, hadn't. Quite simple. Had not goes to hadn't in the negative forms. Now, our homework is on page 106, and it is a listening exercise. What I want you to do is listen twice and tick the one that you hear. And again, it goes on to page 107 at the top. So right to number 9. Okay, please all have your pens in your hand and be ready to take the correct answer. Number 1, he'd worked at a bookstore. Number 2, we left when it started raining. Number 3, they answered the questions. Number 4, I'd eaten my lunch. Number 5, you'd already taken the test. Number 6, she hadn't worked there. Number 7, it hasn't started to rain. Number 8, had he found it? Number 9, have you called Alex? All right, let us do this a second time. He'd worked at a bookstore. We left when it started raining. They answered the questions. I'd eaten my lunch. You'd already taken the test. She hadn't worked there. It hasn't started to rain. Had he found it? Have you called Alex? Okay, what I need you to do, once you've ticked the answers, take a photograph of the exercise on pages 106 and 107. Send the photo as an attachment to an email. Head that email homework and send the email to your speaking teacher. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and you will hear from me again next week.